JJ the CPA here. Hope you're doing well. Small business owners, I'm going to focus in on the self-employed, those of you that are filing Schedule C. Now, I want you to know, it doesn't matter if you're an LLC, a single member LLC, it always matters what tax form are you filing for tax purposes for your small business. So if you're filing a Schedule C, this video's for you. What I've seen after the last 30 years of practice is that the self-employed, those filing Schedule C, make two kind of vital mistakes when they hit tax season, right? This is the time in which we're preparing returns, figuring out, well, what's the net income to then determine what is your tax. Here's what's so critical for the self-employed that file Schedule C is that when you're determining that net income, it's not only subject to income taxes, but it is subject to that additional tax, self-employment taxes, right? That's another 15.3% on your tax bill. So you're going to pay not double tax, but you're going to pay two kinds of taxes. Why is this key? Well, the more that you can properly, by following the rules and the regulations, reduce that net income, well, then of course, what's going to happen? Then the less tax you're going to owe. So the two critical mistakes when we hit tax season is that, number one, many self-employed actually then start determining what it is that they made in the prior year. They then start determining what their expenses are. Now, with the self-employed, many times you're getting a 1099 that helps you know what your net income is or your gross income. But when it comes to the expenses, you once a year now digging back and looking for expenses, you're going to miss them. It's just human nature that you're going to miss these expenses. And so that's the first critical error, is that you're not looking for these expenses. You're not tracking these expenses. Therefore, throughout the year, you don't know where you stand. And therefore, you are in a position of being surprised. You're in a position of then not having the taxes set aside, which the one thing I want you to keep in mind is that for many small businesses, especially for the self-employed, the number one expense to your business is taxes, if you think about it. So you want to pay attention to that as closely as you're paying attention to any other expenses and costs that you have for your small business, which means that you want to be tracking that throughout the year. Don't wait until you are now in tax season. Don't wait until the year is closed to then determine, well, what are my expenses? Therefore, what's my net income? What is it that I'm going to owe? But see, the other second critical mistake that comes into play is by being in that position of not being aware, then many put it off. Why do they put it off? Well, they don't want to know the number. I mean, that's just human nature. I don't want to know what my tax is. I don't know if I got to pay this big bill. And so they then put it off. And then here's what happens in this second critical mistake. They then, by putting it off, now are really doing it kind of last minute. They're waiting till March or late March or even early April to then, almost kind of in a panic, figure out, well, what expenses do I have? And now they're looking back. And what happens when we're in a panic, right? We're in a position where we may not be thinking clearly, or we're just hurrying getting it over with. We're stressed about it. We're maybe not thinking as clearly. That's all just human nature stuff. But if you wait, not only did you wait all the way until tax season, but now you're waiting later in tax season, what did you just do again? Missing expenses. And then, along with that second critical error, if you will, by waiting, is that then when you find out what the tax is, well, then what are you doing? You typically then want to go and look for expenses again, but then you get up against a deadline, because if you don't pay your taxes on or before the deadline, typically April 15th, in 2023, that deadline is April 18th. But if you don't have your taxes paid by then, you start getting late payment penalties for anything that you pay after that date. So that just then leads into the second critical error, leading into insult added to injury, because not only were you not aware of your expenses, you're digging for them, you're not expecting the tax that you had, maybe you don't have the money set aside, now you're paying penalties, you're paying additional monies over to the government, if you will. And with that being said, if it's already your number one expense, this would be similar to you not paying attention to what bills you have coming due. So if you have a telephone bill and you just don't ever really track it, well, then what's going to probably happen after a period of time, right? There's going to be late fees for you to be able to get it current. Just think of it this way. You don't want to have the late fees. So how do you avoid these two critical mistakes, so to speak? Well, track your expenses throughout the year. But see, then many self-employed, they get themselves a little overwhelmed. I'm going to tell you this right now. For many, especially if it's a side gig, it can be as simple as just having a folder that you put your receipts in. You can get more sophisticated, of course, right? And have something that's tracking it. There's a lot of apps out there that will track your expenses. They'll help you categorize them, if you will. There's QuickBooks. But the key here is that even if that's overwhelming, because what happens when something's overwhelming? Well, we then don't do it, right? It's just human nature. We put it off, or we don't have the time, or whatever the case is. Because why? Well, you're trying to take care of business, trying to make money. But when you're in a position of then tracking your expenses, and especially throughout the year, then guess what? It's pretty easy to then know what your income is, and therefore you would be in a position to know as you're going throughout the year, well, what is my net income? Here's what I brought in for the month. Here's my expenses for the month. What's that net? Well, I can tell you this right now, self-employed, those filing Schedule C, whatever that net is, you owe 15.3% in self-employment taxes. And then it'll just depend on whatever tax rate you're in, but I would tell you at least probably looking at 15% tax rate. So you're looking at 30%. And with that being said, guess what else motivates you to then price things properly? Because if you know, well, gosh, I net this, but if I've got to now pay 30% of that net in taxes, then you know better how to price your services. You know better how to make sure you're collecting and you have the right customers that are going to be able to pay you. So by avoiding these two critical layers, it just leads to so many other benefits. Knowing what your expenses are, tracking them as you go along, it'll be much harder to then forget expenses. You're then not in any panic. You'll know what your tax is as you move along. You'll have the money set aside so that when tax time comes, you have that money. And then when you also are looking at the overall benefits of tracking all this throughout the year, it's going to help you better know what you need to price your services for or your products, so that you're not only making enough net income to take care of you and your family, put money into retirement, save for the future of your kiddos or whatever the case is, but you're then wanting to make sure that you're also making enough to cover the taxes in addition to all those other things. So many that do side gigs, you know, you're new to this maybe, and you've had a position with a company, or still do, where taxes are being withheld, that Social Security, Medicare is being withheld and then matched by the employer. So as a self-employed, you get into these new circumstances. And what does that lead to? Taxes, surprises. So here's the deal. Just start tracking it now. So if you're in a position right now and you didn't do it and you're playing catch up, well, what I would tell you is get after it as soon as possible. Figure out where your net income is. Just know what the number is. And then if you got to dig, you got time to dig. You're not up against a deadline. And then just start right now. Just start right now, whatever period of time you're in, whenever you're watching this, and start tracking those expenses and that income for all of these benefits. All right. Hey, thanks for tuning in. I'd love it if you'd subscribe. Don't you ever forget, you've never met a CPA quite like me. But listen, we're going to catch and release. There we go. Just fine.
Good job, boss.
Thank you, brother.
Good.